Chris. Today I want to try something new. I've never really done any streaming or like live modeling with state charts or any software really. So I want to sit down and model Twitter's routing. And there's a couple reasons I want to do this. Um, First, I feel like modeling is such an art, and hopefully the video distills at least how high I model. Not to say that that's the only way that you can model or should model, um, but it feels like it's that kind of tacit information is easily trapped in the into the mind of people who've gotten deep into these topics of how to model complex systems. Um, and then secondly, why Twitter? Um, I wanted to model something that was complicated and hopefully when we dive into it we'll sort of dive into the um, to the details of like why Twitter's UX and design, at least at the highest level, um, is complicated, particularly with the dialogue routing that they do, where pop-ups, if you open a tweet, right? So currently we're home, and if you open a tweet, you're still on the home page and it's still rendered behind, but you're at a new URL. And there's a lot of complexity that this parallel or orthogonal routing has that is complicated to get right. And while I don't know how they've implemented it themselves, it's traditionally been really hard to use the big client-side routers of our time, like React Router, Vue Router, etc., to model these types of situations because those types of routing solutions primarily are designed to work with hierarchical routing, right? So the fact that you can nest different routes in each other, but this concept of orthogonal routing is an entirely new concept and something I know like the latest version of Vue Router needed a breaking change in order to support. So it's a complicated subject, and hopefully by just sitting down, we're not working through the implementation details. It's a different ladder. It's a different level of the ladder of abstraction. We can just sit down and try to model what's going on here, and provide some insight into something that you might not have been as aware of. Um, so yeah, let's dive into it. Um, for all intents and purposes, I want to sort of show off where we are with StateML. Um, we're at a point where we feel like the language is solidifying, and that means we can turn our attention from language design and the rabbit holes that all the rabbit holes that were that stemmed out of that, um, to start working on iterating on the tooling, right? So the core tooling, which we sort of want to at least provide reference implementations for, and in the best case, well thought out common tooling that everyone and Lego blocks that everyone can use. So this includes visualizer built into the IDE or an embeddable visualizer, language server, formatting, structured editing, stuff like that. So without further ado, let's dive into it. Um, so yeah, let's start off. We have a StateML file here. So the language server will pick that up and get all the syntax highlighting and everything and diagnostics running for us. So let's start by defining machine. We call it Twitter app. You'll all see how bad my typing is. um, and well, if we dive into Twitter's user interface, the home page is the default page. So if we want to think about our routes as finite states, finite nested states, or finite orthogonal states, state charts provide a really elegant solution to really model out these finite number of states. There are definitely situations where trying to model routing like this doesn't work if you have any type of dynamic routing where you're dynamically saying, oh, this URL now exists and stuff like that. That's where it gets a little, that's where the overlap between state charts and routing sort of disintegrates. But if we just consider that there are a finite number of routes, um, it's a pretty elegant solution to model these types of behavior. So our initial state will be home, um, and before if we look at the sidebar, there's going to be, let me just open this up, bunch of other URLs that we see here. So explore notifications. And again, we're not going to like dive into the weeds of all of this, but I want to get to a certain level of complexity with this model that's like hopefully non-trivial. Um, at least if it comes off on the surface. Um, so we won't really dive into many of these other tabs, but hopefully the issue stands. And the other point I want to get across that is really important um, is at least in Twitter's case, the URL that is displayed for the user does not directly map to how you can model it. It sort of depends how you model it, but there isn't a one-to-one mapping between the URL and the hierarchy of states that you describe in a state chart. Or at least that's my premise. We'll find out. So yeah, let's just get some states for all these tabs here. Yeah, so we got notifications, state. I'm already forgetting. Explore. Actually, we could just ignore the curly braces for now. Let's see. Messages, bookmarks. Yeah, you sort of get the gist. Profile. There might be some that I'm missing here, but hopefully this sort of gets the point across. We'll get into this a little later, but what you can start to see is when we enter a state, that's when we push a new route to the history of the tab. So you could sort of say push home, right? If we just want to annotate. Right. Should probably just put a slash there just to be a little more, and you can sort of get the gist for the other states. Same thing, kind of thing. And we'll model this in a little more detail later. But just like if we're starting with the top-down approach, we're starting what is the highest level of navigation you could do, and then we'll get more granular. And then once we get a good basis for the makeup of states, then we can sort of dive into transitions between different states or different routes really, and entry actions, like side effects that actually happen. But at least right now, it's not really necessary. We could just assume that it exists. That when we enter a certain state, that the URL magically updates. Yeah, so that is sort of our basic layout. Our top level routes right here. And the first thing that you're going to see is this blue tweet button. And so the fact of the matter is no matter what tab you go to, this tweet button is always here. And when you press this tweet button, so we're on home right now, it opens up a dialog and goes to a new URL. And if we go back, it disappears, right? So it is part of our routing history. And the challenge of what seems like a simple interaction of open a dialog, change the route, it's pretty complicated because we want to make sure that we're rendering this other URL right underneath home. Same if we go to explore and then tweet, right? We still want to go to this URL, this compose slash tweet URL, but we want to make sure the route that we were previously looking at stays on the page and is rendered underneath. And from a UX perspective, I actually sort of appreciate this because like things aren't just flashing and disappearing. It provides it provides you with like spatial awareness. So like I'm typing the street, but I was here. So um, maybe that's why Twitter has implemented their routing, their client-side routing this way. But the point is there's a parallel state here. There are two states that are orthogonal to each other. So let's try to model that. Uh, so we're going to start with initial. So it turns out our initial state is not home. That is not the first state. There's something higher up. There's a parallel state higher up, and we need to wrap all those orthogonal states in them. So initial state, let's call it routes, or let's call it app. I don't know. Sometimes these high level states are a little abstract. And we're going to have a state called routes, which are like the high level routes that we have. And we're going to have a state called compose for writing tweets. And essentially what we want to do is we want to nest these other states in here. Initial parallel states. If I could spell correctly, there we go. So this top level state app doesn't have a route associated with it, and it doesn't need to. And the other thing I just realized is I didn't bring up the viz. We could actually visualize what this looks like. As we're typing, we can actually work through this a little more. So let's figure out what compose is made of. It's a parallel state, so it exists at the same time as these other routes. And for now, let's just say I'm in one of those days where I can't spell initial. We'll have an initial state called hidden, right? That represents that the modal or the dialogue to author a tweet is hidden, and then we'll have a state, and that's the state that we want to start in, and we'll have a state called tweet or displayed, in which case the dialogue is displayed. So on hidden, we'll just listen to an event called tweet, and when someone tweets, we'll go to displayed. And similarly, we'll go back to the UI in a second, but we'll have an event called close, and we'll go back to hidden. Right, and so this is a way we could stay in these top level routes while also exploring these other orthogonal states to open it to tweet and stuff like that. There's additional interactions here that I sort of want to avoid, but if you type something, there's a whole multitude of states that are gonna come up after this. So if we'll have some editing state and some like idle state. So that will we could get to that later. But then there's this whole concept of discarding and saving tweets. If I press escape, I just get out of it. So there's another dialogue that doesn't change the route, but is orthogonal to these other two states. And you can sort of see that adds a lot of complexity too. to the way that we're trying to model this. There's also a whole bunch of UI interactions that I'm not going to get into, like for authoring, that I'm not going to get into. In fact, uh, oops, um, I think there's a whole the routing gets even more crazy for the whole authoring section. But this is the important part. We're just going to discard this. Um, that lays hidden in this compose state, right? And for right now, we don't really care about that. We just care about, or I'm sorry, compose dot displayed, um, right? So the beauty is however that displayed state works, we don't care about. We could ignore that for the time being and come back to it later. And that's really important for this kind of for modeling with state charts, where you can model top down. So start at the highest routes, for example, and come and then get more granular in each state, which is sort of what we'll do. Or you could start bottom up and just dive into whatever this is doing, and then care about everything else. So finding that balance and switching between the two is really interesting, and I don't think I have a way to articulate when and why and how you would do that. Typically, I start top down, just start with the highest and work layer by layer. And I think that's one of the reasons I really love state charts. Um, so yeah, so we've sort of modeled that dialogue interaction at least at the highest level. So let's get into some of the interactions that you can encounter here. Um, so if we go home, um, well, first thing you can do, you can click on your own profile or other people's profiles. So as you can see, that is a top level route. Um, so let's model that. Oops. Okay, so that that interaction right there, where I clicked on a profile, brings up another top level route that we can be at, which is a user. Let me just minimize this. So let's record that. State user. Um, just for transparency, um, or handle, if you want to call it that. Yeah, so we have a route called user, and then the question comes up, what can we do when we're looking at a user? Well, there's 4 tabs right here, and those conceptually map to uh, different states that we can be in, and because we're modeling routing, they affect the routing. This is keep. Let me just close out of Discord. This is traditional. This is like a traditional hierarchical or nested routing. So we have an initial state called tweets. Oh man, initials really getting me. We have a state called replies. We have a state called media, and a state called likes. So those are conceptually our 4 different tabs that we have here. And one of the interesting things is you can navigate between those 4 different tabs when you're in the user state. So let's add those events. Navigate to tweets, and we'll go to dot. We'll go to dot tweets. Oops. And then we'll just copy this a couple times. Oops. And then we'll navigate to replies. And we'll go to replies. navigate to media, and navigate to likes, and dot likes. Oops, dot media, dot likes. So we've modeled this interaction, this routing, and obviously when we enter those states, um, we will navigate to a different route. Now, what else can we do on this page? We could view followers, so that's another state. We could view following. So let's add those to our model. Yeah, state followers. And we could just duplicate these. Yeah. So the reason those events happen is because it doesn't matter any what substate you're in. Um, you you go to that route. And there's some additional complexity, uh, which is just made apparent to me that um, followers and following is its own is a nested state. So because you can be in followers or following, and they're themselves tabs. Um, we want to wrap these in a state whose name I don't even know. We'll just call it follow. And so anytime our initial state will be followers because it's on the left, and following over here. Sort of arbitrary, but yeah, there's some additional complexity there, and we will get to this lower level behavior of like what can I do in each of these tabs, because that even complicates things more. Um, but that will probably be another video. Um, ah, so following. So our paths changed. Um, Um, so yes, that was important. Um, okay, so we're making good progress. We have this concept of a user, the ability to navigate to a user, and if you, one of the beautiful things about Twitter is everything's a tweet. So if you go to any of these pages, um, you will you have the ability to click on a given tweet, and interact with it too, right? So ability to retweet or like it or comment on it. So there's some additional affordances there that we definitely need to talk about. Um, and also, what's interesting is that whole dialogue, right, that pops up here. Well, it also is embedded right in the homepage too. So all those interactions. Um, all those interactions that happen in oops uh, all those interactions that happen here uh, um, also happen here. So that probably indicates to me that we want to encapsulate all that state that I sort of um, said we'll come back to later in its own machine, because we're already seeing redundancy between how you can alter things in the app. Um, so I feel like the next step that we wanna get to. Um, one of the other things that just came up is, if you see, we initially modeled a profile state because I sort of was being lazy, and I was just like, all of these are going to be their own different state. The profile is really just an alias for a given user. Um, so what that means is that we can actually we can remove this profile state. In fact, that's the next part that we should talk about, which is also I'm just gonna move these events to the top. I feel like that's just more intuitive because then they could get it lost at the bottom of a very large nested state. Um, so let's briefly, and I'm probably not going to do this fully. We're just going to copy this style of transition, which is to say, anytime we're in this routes um, and we want to navigate home, we're going to go to dot home. And you could sort of see where this is going. I'll just do a couple more to not waste your time. And then the last one, we'll do profile. So profile is an interesting case where when you click on a profile, we actually want to navigate to user with a specific payload that is not included in the language, which is a whole nother conversation that we'll talk about next time. But for the concept of modeling, we don't really need to think about that. We just need to know when this navigate the profile event happens, we're not navigating to a profile state, we're navigating to a user. And this helps, yeah, because that's actually how it's modeled. It's more of a alias than its own route. So let's click on a tweet. I want to click I want to find a good one. This is a cool one. This is about state explosion with finite state machines and transition explosion as compared to with state charts. And I think one of the interesting things here is that state charts, they might not reduce the number of states, they might not reduce the number of transitions, but they provide an intuitive flow, right? If you're looking at this, good luck following this finite state machine. But when you at least from a topological standpoint, I know this is example sort of meaningless, but when you look at the state chart, the flow is, from a topological standpoint, much more evident. And I feel like that's something that hasn't really been talked about before, at least from what I've read. And I think that's really important. And I should probably write something about that. But anyway, we're getting distracted here. What route are we on? Well, we're looking at a tweet. Um, their URL is status. I'm not entirely sure why, but we'll just use that terminology. We'll use that terminology instead. So that's another route. So let's just assume the user route is done. Let's minimize that. And let's define a state called status. And the URL is going to be /status/ status ID. This is just bookkeeping for our implementation, but you could sort of see where we're going here. What exists in status that could only exist in status? Because we're looking at a tweet here. And this is where it gets interesting, is these routes. So if a tweet has likes, retweets, quote tweets, then you're able to go to those pages. And this is where it gets a little more complicated. Some of these are modal. So right now we're on a tweet and we're looking at likes, and that like is a modal, and the tweet needs to stay behind it. So let's try to model that. We should start with, we have a parallel state here, right? Which is the fact that you could look at a tweet and then something else can be displayed above it. That is a different route. So then we need to model it as such. So we have I don't know what the best word here is. We'll have a state called idle, maybe? No, not idle. That's always my default. We will have a state here called, I'm just going to call it tweet. There might be a better name for this, but we could always come back to it. No need to totally, you know, stop over the name. And then, we'll have a state called dialogues because there's going to be multiple dialogues that live in here. Um, and they can't live at the same time. So this is actually really important. So we'll have an initial state, if I could spell, called we'll follow this terminology for now, but we probably want to keep the dialogues terminology consistent. Um, Maybe they're closed and opened is a better name. I'm not sure. We're gonna have two states here, which I haven't demoed to you in the UI, but we're gonna have a likes route, and um, we're gonna have a um, retweet route. And quote tweet is going to be another thing based off my explorations. But what you can see here is that when you click on likes, it's gonna open that modal. Um, so when we're in hidden, right, and this is an important thing. This overlay that when you click likes prevents other navigations from happening. Um, so we don't need a cover cases where like the transition. Um, uh, there's like like we don't need to cover cases uh, where like you can be in retweets and likes at the same time and stuff like that. That is sort of restricted by the UI, but we do want to make sure it's restricted by our model as well, which is really important. And so likes and retweets are, you can only be in one or the other. um, So we can open likes, and we'll go to likes. And we probably want to do the same thing with retweets, even though I haven't showed it. You could just trust me that it's the same thing. Um, and when we're in likes, what happens? Well, we could close or we could follow someone. Um, so if I just like follow this person, it doesn't actually close anything. Um, So that's actually an interesting thing that we need to note here. So on close, we'll go back to hidden, um, and then on follow, we actually don't want to do a state change, but we want to perform a side effect, which is save follow. So we want to save the whoever that we just followed. And there's some additional like complexity around that dialogue to like unfollow someone. Different concern. We that is a little too detailed for what I want to do here. And we'll confirm this right now, but my suspicion is retweets is going to follow the same thing. Uh, so let's find a tweet that has some retweets. This one does. So let's see. So I could it's the same exact thing. Um, in either of those cases, you could either close or follow someone. There might be some additional affordances here, so you could technically navigate to a user, um, but we'll take care of that in a little bit. Um, Now, quote tweets is where it gets interesting. Let me find something that has a quote tweet, um, because it's not a modal. uh, quote tweet, yeah. Oh, that's a bad example. Sometimes it's like nothing shows up, even though Twitter says there's a quote tweet that exists. Um, let's see. There we go. So quote tweet is an entirely different route, which complicates our model because it would have been easy to be like, oh, let's just like copy retweets and win another dialogue or whatever, but we can't do that. So let's figure out how we want to go about this. I if we look at the route, we have we're at a tweet and we're at this route called retweets with comments. Um, uh, um, so let me just show you how routing works here. So we have likes, retweets, and this is actually wrong right now, right? So this is not annotating we're not commenting the route correctly here. We want an initial state. Oh, cat box. Initial state called. What's the best way to word it? I'm just gonna say idle because I can't really think of a name right now. And that idle state. So we're looking at a tweet, and idle isn't the right word here, but it's just gonna be a placeholder. Is the status that we're looking at, and we're going to have another state that we can navigate to and back from. That is the quote tweets. And that's how we're going to represent this interaction here, where you could look at a quote. You could look at a quote and click on it, and it will bring you to that next page, and you can go back. So one of the cool things is you will just take a short intermission from modeling a status or a tweet. And one of the things you can see back button is almost on every page. For now, if we're being lazy, let's go to routes, the end of routes, and add a on back. On back, we're not going to perform anything, but we would tell the router to go back. We're going to tell the browser or the router or the history API to say, go back. And conceptually, if we think about our router as an actor that we're communicating with, which could be described as an activity called router. So we're just going to leave that in there. That's another implementation detail. I'm not going to dive too much into it. This activity could send us back events on navigating to home or navigating the profile if we press the back button. So just keep that in mind. This will probably be another video where we want to model something. And this brings us back to quote tweets, which is like, what can we do? What can we do on a quote tweet? Let me go back there. There's a whole slew of interactions. Again, too complicated for where we're at right now, but we will get back to it. If we wanted to, we can leave a comment here being like, hey, still got to model quote tweets. But that's sort of just going to copy this. With underscore replies. I believe that's what the route is. Let's just confirm that. Oh, with comments. So you could sort of just see in the status state how convoluted in a certain sense the route is from the structure of the finite states that you're modeling with it. Right? So I think that's really important to get routing right with state charts. Um, yeah, and so if we take a step back, let's go back here. One thing we missed: what happens if a route doesn't have a quote tweets or retweets or likes? Well, they don't display it in the UI, but we do want to make sure our model and our application's behavior is robust. So we actually want to add some guards to these transitions here to say uh, if tweet has likes, then allow this transition to open the dialog. If tweet has retweets, then go to retweets. And the last thing that we didn't model here, which is if we're in the idle state, then on navigate to quote. I should put an underscore there. Navigate to quote tweets. If tweet has quote tweets, go to quote tweets. Wonderful. And all this shows up in the visualization. Right now, I'm not really using the visualization too much. And I think in the future, once you're able to actually once we have an interpreter and we're actually able to simulate what's happening here, the visualization will be a lot more important. So yeah, that will be an exploration for another time. But it is important. Every keystroke, the visualization is the most complete, most up to date that it could be. Which is and we get to explore these additional affordances like highlighting on hover to really link these two different representations together and ground ourselves in the visual formalism. So that is definitely really important. Yeah, that's like that's like probably a good chunk of what you can do here. There's additional things you could like a tweet, you could retweet. So we can include those events in status. So that would be on this poorly named state called idle is on like do save like oops, and there'll be some imperative logic and same thing on retweet. I didn't forget a space. Do retweet. And this will probably be some asynchronous call that just happens in the background. If we do need to keep track of it, then we need, if we do need to keep track of whether an error happens or not, then it's likely that we need to keep track of that side effect by creating an activity and waiting for it to be done and handling errors that way. For right now, let's just start with the simplest thing that we can do, which is just say it's a side effect that happens and assume it's perfect for now. And later we can dive into what that asynchronous workflow looks like. This is going to be a little simplistic. So this is going to bring us to some this is actually going to bring us to the compose. It's going to be a special compose because it's going to have that tweet that we want to quote tweet already. You could see, so that's going to open the dialogue with this already in it. So the beauty is all we need to do is, where are we? See, it's already getting pretty big. On quote tweet, we want to raise, because we're not immediately quote tweeting, we need to author something. Raise open compose tweet. And that the intent of this action, emphasis on intent, is that we want to raise an event. We want to raise the tweet event so that it opens the dialogue, right? So we have these parallel or orthogonal parts of our system that are now communicating together in harmony. So that's where we sort of get in there. Yeah, that's a large part of it. Obviously, comments are a whole another rabbit hole that add another level of complexity where you can navigate to a comment. The beauty is that comment is just another tweet. So from a URL perspective, we're really just navigating to another tweet. So it's actually really easy to model. It's just we'll add so, and this is something that I sort of skipped over, but on almost every page you can navigate to a tweet, right? So that event can be hoisted up to this like top level state where we can just say I'm just going to call status for consistency, but we're going to go to dot status, right? Totally forgot. I was trying to be consistent with my events here. So all the events are at the top. And so now that we've sort of done a deep dive into how statuses works, although it's not complete, we could sort of just forget about it and move on to the next part of the application that we want to model. There's definitely a lot more complexity here, but I think it's been long enough that this is probably its own video. So hopefully next time we can pick up where we left off and continue modeling Twitter. But I hope what you're seeing here is Twitter's routing, or the Twitter app itself, and the routing that is implemented with it is complex, and the ability to sort of just from a top-down approach, start modeling behavior as granular as we can, then come back up, do another, start from the top and model another section or whatever really fits your style of modeling. That's really important here. And to have the primitives of concurrency, of nested, of high state hierarchy, the ability to hoist events up and for broadcast mechanisms, as in what we were talking about just now with status, is really important. And they're the really primitive building blocks. The other important building block is the ability to model stateful entities. So we have some router. That router has state, right? The tab bars history, or the browser's the browser history. We're able to communicate it through events, and those events can be user clicks, navigate to home, and it could also be raised by the browser saying, hey, the user pressed back and they want to go to home now, so we need to bring them to home. That's really important as we try to break down these complicated systems and then additionally document and visualize what they look like. So yeah, that will sort of wrap up our first video on navigating. If you have any feedback, just let me know. Always interested in better ways to articulate what the modeling process is, because it is so much more of an art than a science at this point. So yeah, cheers.